This is Building Bridges with Michael Hershman.
Hello, I'm Michael Hershman, and welcome to Building Bridges, that which unites us. A candid look at culture, democracy, and finding common ground. Today I'm joined by Jonathan Kilman, founder and chairman of Converge Public Strategies. With a career built at the intersection of law, policy, and public affairs, Jonathan is a nationally respected advisor and strategist, known for guiding some of the world's most recognizable companies through complex matters. His work spans local, state, and federal governments, and his efforts have helped shape policy, drive innovation, and strengthen communities. Jonathan, welcome. It's good to have you here today. So, you are, by birth, a Northeasterner.
That's right.
Your grandparents from Brooklyn.
That's right.
You guys migrated to Jersey, which is west of Manhattan.
It's close.
You grew up in Jersey. And I got to ask you, as a young man growing up, what did you want to do with your life? What was you, other than being a baseball player, which most Northeasterner kids want to do?
You know, I played baseball as a kid, but I never, being an athlete wasn't what I wanted to do. I was always really interested in learning and in school. And for me, beyond academia, the people that I saw that were thinkers were rabbis. And so for me, that was very influential. And I, would look at rabbis and think, maybe someday I'll do that. And I would hear cantors sing, and I thought it was beautiful. So I thought, maybe I'll do that. But by the time I was a teenager, actually, and I don't know if it's just my age, I'm 50 years old now, I was very heavily influenced by movies about the Cold War. Movies like Spies Like Us and Red Dawn and these other movies in the 1980s, war games. And I thought diplomacy was the coolest thing you could do and the most valuable thing you could do. So my whole life, I thought of myself as a future diplomat. And that idea persisted my entire life, even as other things were interesting to me. I thought someday I'll be a diplomat. I went to law school thinking that's what I would do. And it just came out the other end of law school with some different ideas. But maybe today, in some ways, I think of myself as a diplomat in other ways, but not necessarily the way that I originally intended.
So you went to this little-known law school. I think it's called Harvard. Is that correct?
I did.
And I want to talk to you about law school for a second, because I do a lot of mentoring of college students or pre-college as well, what they want to do with their lives. And they often ask me about law school, and I tell them, if you go to law school, you don't necessarily have to be a lawyer. That it's a good education from a general learning perspective. Would you say that's correct?
I agree with that. I think it's demonstrated by the number of attorneys who end up doing other things, but I also sort of weigh that against the reality that law schools become very expensive. It's a 3-year commitment of your life. There are a lot of other things you can do, like business school, et cetera, or maybe today just getting some life experience. So when I talk to young people, I try to assess, is law school really for them? What do they want to get out of it? Do they have the propensity to succeed in law school? It's not just, are you good at making arguments? It's, do you want to learn the process? Which, in law school they say is learning to think like a lawyer, right? So I really try to sort of tease out of them through questions, is that what you want? And is there any chance you might want to practice law? If there's zero chance, then maybe law school isn't for you, but I really try to understand what their goals are. I do think some people go to law school with this idea of it becoming kind of another generalist degree that gives them a foundation. And I think for some people that's true. But I think you have to have a certain mindset to want to participate. It's a lot of work, a lot of reading, a lot of academic rigor. And I think it requires a certain personality type to thrive in that environment.
Going through law school, was there any particular type of law that you were attracted to? Civil, criminal? What was it that you were focusing on in law school?
So for me, I became excited by different professors and the way that they would teach. And so for a while, I think I was just sort of all over the place. I had one professor, Larry Lessig, who I thought was extraordinary, and I had him twice. He was my constitutional law professor, my contracts professor. The process, the way that he would teach, it wasn't just that he applied the Socratic process. I just found that he made each idea a bit more exciting and kind of kept us on the edge of our seat. So as I went through law school, I had different professors that would activate these different interests of mine. Ultimately, I sort of saw the business world, the intersection of business and law, and found it fascinating, and began my career doing mergers and acquisitions, which really is a far cry from why I went to law school and really what I thought I would end up doing. But it was interesting. I wanted to pursue it, and I did.
And in your case, you did become a lawyer, indeed, and worked at law firms.
That's right.
But then you kind of shifted, and you went into the business community. And now you run a company called Converge, which is a public affairs company. Right. So am I right in calling you a reform lawyer now?
I would say it this way. What I've done as a lawyer my entire career, and the things I learned as a lawyer, are a part of everything I do every day, right? It goes back to that idea of thinking like a lawyer. You learn a process for distilling problems, developing solutions, and being able to take a position on it that's backed by some reasoning. I think I do that every day. And I also review a lot of contracts. I sit across the table and negotiate a lot of things. And one of the things I did focus on when I was in law school is learning how to negotiate. I participated in a negotiation competition called the Williston Contracts Competition. For me, that was always an aspect of what I wanted to get out of law school. So if by looking at the fact that I don't sit in a courtroom, I'm not litigating cases, I'm not negotiating contracts on behalf of others. In that sense, I'm not practicing law in the traditional sense. But I think most lawyers who you talk to who no longer practice traditional law would say, oh, I'm still putting to practice everything I learned as a lawyer, just in a different format. Now I'm my own client.
And you also, during this period of time, decided maybe the Northeast was not the best place to be. And so you migrated, but you migrated before the Great Migration,
right,
before the COVID migration, and moved down to Florida, Miami,
yeah,
where you now live in Florida, although I think you're no longer in Miami proper, but
right.
Why? So what is it about the Northeast that you felt like you needed to abandon?
Okay, well, the first piece is, the first time I moved to South Florida was as a teenager. My parents moved our family down there, and after graduating, I went to undergraduate school at the University of Florida, went to Harvard for law school, and then practiced law in the Northeast. Came back to Florida, and I've sort of yo-yoed professionally up and down the East Coast ever since. I spent a lot of time now in Washington, D.C., a lot of time here in Manhattan, and so I always feel like I've sort of lived on the East Coast, so to speak. But the move to Miami, the move to South Florida, was actually precipitated by my wife, who her employer moved their senior team to Miami, and that was an easy place for us to consolidate our family and our opportunity to grow together. And so Miami was the destination. But I can tell you, I remember we bought an apartment, a condo in Midtown Miami. And I remember looking out onto Miami Beach, and this is now about 12 years ago. And I remember thinking, this city has incredible potential to become a tier one city in maybe not just the United States, but even the world. I thought that would take maybe decades. And I remember thinking to myself, if I dedicate my time, my career to this place for the next 20, 30 years, I will get to be a part of something really special. I couldn't have imagined 12 years ago what would have happened and the rate of acceleration that would have occurred. COVID obviously had something to do with that, but what I imagined might happen happened much faster and much bigger than I even anticipated.
Now, are you one of those Floridians that don't want any more New Yorkers moving down to Florida?
Maybe there's a part of me that wants that, but the truth is, I see what's happening. I see how special it is. Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, he coined the term capital of capital. And South Florida, really, it's not just Miami. South Florida is aiming to become this capital of capital. I won't say the capital of capital. I'm a big believer in New York. I really believe that New York is this incredibly resilient place. And I think New York is always going to have a special role, especially in the capital markets. I think that Florida historically wasn't some place that would have been taken very seriously, but the number of family offices we see relocating to Florida, the number of venture funds that are now, I'm a founder of a venture fund as well. We see this aggregation of capital happening in Florida, and particularly in Palm Beach County, Broward County, and Miami-Dade County. So no, I'm not ready to pull the ladder up quite yet, but I can tell you the commute time between Broward County and Miami-Dade counties, and I know you've spent some time in South Florida, it's really dramatically increased in recent years. And one of the biggest challenges that Florida's going to have is matching the demand by people who want to live there with the infrastructure to support the kind of growth. I mean, almost 500,000 people, I think, in the last year have moved to, maybe 300,000-400,000 have moved to Florida.
At some point along the way in Florida, you also got involved in politics, which is in direct contradiction from your youth desire to become a diplomat. But you worked for a governor or two down in Florida, and I'm curious to know what you see, if you see any, as the differences between New York politics and Florida politics.
Oh, there's so many differences. I mean, look, I think there are fundamental different ideological viewpoints. And obviously that's not true for everyone, but I think sort of the prevailing cultural norms of the role that government's going to have is different in Florida and New York, and I think that's one thing. But I could focus in on a different, more of a microcosmic aspect of this, which is, if you look at New York City, it's got one primary governance structure. South Florida, although we do have kind of county governments, you have a lot of smaller municipalities. So even in Miami-Dade County, you have dozens of small municipalities, which means that people who move there have the opportunity to interact directly with their local mayor, their local city manager or village manager. And so there's a certain responsiveness that you can force as a local citizen that's a lot harder to do in a big city. So I don't know if we're talking New York City or if we're talking New York State, but if you were to sort of compare New York City to South Florida, I think one of the sort of distinguishing characteristics is the sheer number of local governments you have, where almost anybody, even if you're in a city like Coral Gables, which is a bustling, affluent suburb, I wouldn't really call it a suburb, it's sort of a mini city next to Miami, you can have a relationship with your local city commissioners and your mayor. So there's a certain responsiveness that you can expect, and you can then pick and choose where you want to live as these cities kind of compete with one another. And so I think that's a structural difference, not an ideological difference, but I think it's one that some people like, and it allows people who are thinking about moving to Florida to very carefully choose where they want to be and say, I like Delray Beach, but I don't like Boca. I love Boca, but I don't like, fill in the blank. I think you can make a lot of choices because of these different local governments that do things differently. And that's not an advantage necessarily, it's a difference.
And do you see, look, on the national level, we have a lot of divisions in this country. Some of it due to politics, no question about it. Do you see the sort of heavy line divisions in Florida that you're seeing on a national scale?
Well, look, Florida has clearly trended toward the Republican side of the scale. That said, Florida's a big state. If you look at our urban centers, I think they tend to be predominantly still more Democratic than Republican. But I think Florida's a big state, and in that sense, I will always think of it in some respects as a purple state, despite the trending, and I think the trending is very clear and probably more significant than most states towards Republican administrations. We have majority Republican House of Representatives, majority Republican Senate. We have a widely known Republican governor, Ron DeSantis. I think the policies that they've been adopting for years, and this goes back to Jeb Bush era, have been primarily what we would call conservative, however you want to define that. And so there's this trend, and that sort of trend is either going to attract someone or it's going to repel someone. With the net migration numbers that we're seeing in Florida, I think it's clearly attracting more people than it's repelling, significantly more. We're now, I think, over 23 million people, millions more than when I first moved to Florida. And so I think that's sort of where Florida is today. If you're asking me, do I see the divisions? Sure, I see the divisions, but I think there's an overall theme that Florida's done a good job of developing for itself, and it's clearly working. But on an interpersonal level, we have a divided country that plays out in every part of the country I go into. I meet people who seem to be very dug into their perspectives.
Yeah, politics has become, at least on the national level, and somewhat on the local level, depending on where you live, it's become a blood sport. Why would anyone want to even expose themselves to a political career when you know you're going to be facing the ugliest of attacks by whoever your opponent is?
The first thing I'd say is I'm not running for office. Never have, and I don't see myself doing it. I think it takes a person with a certain constitution to be willing to do that. You have to have a very thick skin, given the scrutiny that you endure today, fairly or unfairly, through the media, through social media. It's almost impossible to escape scrutiny. So I give a lot of credit to the people who do run for office. I think it's clearly a very difficult thing to do these days. I've involved myself in it more by supporting candidates and by advocating on behalf of clients in front of governments. That to me has been, it goes back to the diplomacy that I sort of thought I might do someday. It gives me the opportunity to have an impact on issues that I've really enjoyed doing, a wide range of issues over the years. And I do feel like I've been able to make a meaningful impact in advancing things that I thought were worth advancing. So I think participating in politics is a necessity for anybody who wants to make a difference at large scale, right? And I find most of the people who are involved in it, I know that there's this notion that people do it just for ego. I actually think people fundamentally, more often than not, want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, and they participate in it for that reasons. They then find themselves in the blood sport and have to figure out how much they're willing to compromise to protect themselves.
It seems to me that we've become more of a country that wants change for the sake of change. And it's very difficult to have consistency in policy.
Right.
If we're continually rolling over with new governments and new individuals and new policies. It's a delicate balance, but people are generally unhappy with folks in office today.
Yeah. Look, there are a lot of reasons for that. Probably some of it does have to do with social media and the kind of magnification of the extremes through platforms like social media. But I would say this idea of change for its own sake, I would sort of just frame it a little bit differently and say there are a lot of people for whom government hasn't worked for a long time, and that's not a partisan attack. That is probably representative of both parties. I think that increasing wealth gap in this country has led some people to sort of recognize that for them the system isn't working, and I think we have to address that. And for the people who look at the current, I'm going to use system, it's very broad because there are many systems within this country. For the people who look at the systems of governance around them and say, this isn't working for me, I think they look around and say, I have no choice but to ask for change, whatever that change looks like, because it feels like it may be better for them. I think the current administration in Washington, D.C. is there because people want change. If they didn't want change, we wouldn't have Donald Trump as president of the United States. He is a change agent, and I think he's a change agent for people in a way that really transcends party. I think people who are dissatisfied with the way that the government has worked for them are looking for someone who's not afraid to make change and not afraid to be criticized for making that change by either side. And so that's what I think is driving this. And whether they're happy or not, I think is sometimes also dictated by this echo chamber of things like social media, where they hear voices that are almost encouraging them to be dissatisfied. At the same time, they may have real reasons to be dissatisfied with aspects of their lives. So it's maybe a bit of a vicious cycle, and I'm hopeful, and I try to be optimistic, that our country can find its path forward and find a way to sort of bring people together again. That is not easy.
This may be a case of the grass being greener on the other side, of course. Be careful what you wish for. But I'm going to assume that you are a proud graduate of Harvard. And I wanted to ask you about this administration's approach, not only at Harvard, but for other universities, right, and the threat of withdrawing federal grant monies to the universities unless they make changes. Have you been in touch with other Harvard graduates and spoken to them? Tell me what the view of the Harvard folks are.
I think first and foremost, focus on what the problem is, right? And recognize, I believe there is actually a problem in higher education that probably needs to be addressed. We can get to how to address it, but I think the first question is, do you believe that there is a problem? When I talk to other graduates, their position on it tends to be very much aligned with whether they believe there's a problem in the first place. For those that don't believe there's a problem to be addressed, then they think all of the efforts by the administration are heavy-handed. By those who believe that there is a problem to be addressed, I think they're much more open to looking to ways that the administration can be involved in helping to redefine higher education's role in instituting certain ideas, whether it's DEI or other policies. And I think that's where the dividing line is. My view of it is, when I say there's a problem, I take a bit of a nuanced view. I believe in the value of classical liberal thought in an academic setting. I believe that the pursuit of truth is the purpose of these universities. Now, there are other reasons why higher educational institutions exist: vocational training, career training. You don't go to business school for a classical liberal education, right? But I do think at its core, higher education is meant to be a place where varying ideas compete. They're allowed to compete. They're allowed to offend, and by offending, they enable the students and the academy to develop better and stronger ideas that enable them to go out and then make statements that shape other people's opinion, and that later trickles down to changes in our society as a whole, in the business community, in politics and policy, in culture. I think what has happened is that some higher education institutions got more engaged in attempting to transform society more actively, as opposed to doing it by enabling a search for the truth and a competition of ideas. And those institutions are finding themselves in a tricky spot. Now, I don't sit here today trying to judge what's the appropriate solution to that. I think I'm trying to define what caused this moment where people are concerned. The attacks on different parts of the student population, particularly Jewish students in recent times, is an example of, and it's not just the attacks, it's the way that certain institutions responded to those attacks that has led to, I think, some people to question whether the universities have sort of gone too far. And that is, I think, the crux of the issue that's being focused on and needs to be addressed. I would be happy if those universities would address it internally, and I think that would be the best thing. I think this administration is grappling with what role they have, and I think America as at large is grappling with what role government has in trying to redirect those issues and see if that can be brought to some sort of moderation.
Well, this show is called Building Bridges, that which unites us, and your response to that question is very responsible. I think it makes a lot of sense. So, law, business, public affairs. At some point in the recent past, you decided to form a company called Converge. Why did you call it Converge?
So, look, when you're starting an organization, it's one of the first challenges you have is thinking, what should we call this thing? And I thought what I wanted to do was try to bring together people with different viewpoints and talents and build an organization. And Converge symbolized the idea of bringing different people and different talents and viewpoints together. So Converge Public Strategy was born, and the company is primarily engaged in the business of advocating on behalf of organizations, business, nonprofits, and in some cases governments, in front of other governments, legislatures, local governments, and the federal government.
So people come to you or corporations come to you if they have a problem,
Yes.
or if they just need help in gaining traction, if you will, whether that traction is in the public sector or private sector. Talk to me a little about companies that do have a problem and need help in what's called crisis communication or crisis management.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about how you advise companies in that regard.
Well, look, I wouldn't consider myself a crisis communications expert. We do have people in our firm that specialize in that, but I can say this, and I think this is true, and because I am regularly involved in what people would think of as sort of bet the company issues, right? The worst thing you can do is hide from the problem, right? And I'm regularly communicating with companies that are regulated by government, and I encourage them to take a proactive approach. If you know that there's a regulator looking at you, especially if it's a regulator that comes down with heavy scrutiny, don't wait for the scrutiny to come. You should be doing whatever you can to demonstrate your effort to be compliant as early and as often as possible. And I think generally speaking, when you do that, the regulators in those environments look at you more fairly, a little bit less heavy-handed when you do make a mistake.
Transparent.
Yeah, the more transparent you are. And so that's in the regulated context. I would say the same thing is true in business. When you're being scrutinized by the public, get out there, be transparent, deal with it. The more you duck and weave, the more people are going to fill in the blanks on their own. And that's where the problems begin. And that's true whether it's a regulator or media or the public. Don't just duck and weave. Try to define the narrative yourself. And hopefully, if you're doing the right thing, you have a good narrative to say. And if you don't have a good narrative to say because somebody in your organization did make a mistake, get out there, get ahead of it, acknowledge it. Don't try and duck and weave around it. That only makes the problem worse.
Do you find it frustrating at times to deal with government bureaucracies?
Yes, but I'm fortunate in that I get hired by clients who are getting frustrated by government bureaucracies daily, and I get to deal with those problems for them and hopefully help them. So, I mean, all kidding aside, I get frustrated primarily when I talk to someone who I don't find to be open to receiving information. There are people in some bureaucracies who, whether they've been in the job too long or it's just the nature of their personality, that they're the expert in everything. And it doesn't matter what information you bring to them. They know more than you. They know more than the experts that you bring in with you. And there's simply no educating them. And those are the people that I get frustrated with. Fortunately, in a democratic society that we have, usually when you hit that stumbling block, you find somebody else you can then go to and either move up the chain or go and talk to someone a member of Congress or a legislator and say, hey, I'm not getting a lot of attention on this issue. This is one of your constituents. Is that something we can maybe talk about and bring some attention to the matter? But that's where I get frustrated. It's not when someone doesn't agree with the argument we make. It's when they don't listen to the argument we make. I think everybody deserves an opportunity to be heard. That's the point of the form of government we have, an opportunity to be heard. You don't have to agree with us, but you should listen. That's my role. That's the role of the professionals that work in our firm, is to give a voice to the people who have a reason they need to have their point of view heard. And if we do that, we've done our job. Obviously, the goal is to be convincing, so be persuasive and deliver the message in a way that persuades the listener. But the first part is that we get to be heard. And I only get frustrated when that opportunity is not given.
Do you find any difference between dealing at the federal level, state level, or city level with government officials?
I do. First and foremost, local governments are hyper responsive to their local constituents, right? So when you're dealing with local government, you really have to have a feel for what the local community is thinking, right? That grassroots thing. At the state level, they're a little bit more buffered from that, but they still care, right? But if you're going to influence them, you have to have a much greater grassroots coalition to make a dent. So it becomes a little bit more professionalized, a little bit more of a buffer from kind of grassroots impact. At the federal level, I think in some respects, you have people from all over the country coming together to run this country. So in order to have an impact, if you're trying to amass a kind of a grassroots voice, you have to have real resources to do that. On the flip side, I find that the institutional organizations, the agencies, while they may be very bureaucratic in some way, they operate in the most sort of professionalized manner. And so there's a sort of duality of that. On the one hand, these institutions are very professional. On the other hand, they're more insulated from, being sort of forced to listen, and you have to be a little bit louder sometimes. So there's that kind of give and take as you go kind of up and down the chain from the local to the federal level.
I want to go back to talking about politics for a minute because if I'm not mistaken, you have in Florida, there's a governor's race coming up. Is that next year?
No, so Governor DeSantis has got a couple more years before the next election, but we do have one, and the sort of group of potential candidates have begun to form.
He's term limited, is that correct?
He's term limited, right. He's term limited.
How many terms in Florida?
Two.
Just 2 terms?
8 years, yeah.
And there are already some announced candidates.
Yeah, well, we know Congressman Byron Donalds has already made it clear that he's running. Mm-hmm. I think there are some others sort of waiting in the wings. That remains to be seen.
So it should be a fairly active political season. Well, not only then, but of course, midterm elections and such. You have children?
I've got 6.
6 children. What are the ages?
From 23 to 7.
Okay. So if one of your children says, Daddy, I really want to go into politics, what's your advice?
Okay. I have a real live example of this because it happened. My daughter told me that she wanted to go into politics and government. My initial reaction was, don't do it. And I don't really have a perfect answer to why I said that, but politics is very cyclical. And with a lot of careers, there's sort of a smooth trajectory. Politics is really driven by election cycles. And one day you're in government, the next day you're out of government. And so there was a part of me that sort of worried a little bit about that stability for her. And there's another factor, which is, I'm 50 years old, and I came up in the sort of governmental world at a time where women maybe always didn't have it easy. And that's probably not the best perspective to have. But I worried for her about that. I can tell you, she's proven me wrong. I'm really glad she's proven me wrong. She has a job in government today. She's just got into a master's program in applied politics and policy. I am so glad that she didn't listen to my advice. And I'm really glad that she didn't especially listen to any of the instincts I had around what a woman could accomplish in government. My concern as a father is almost in total contradiction to what I want to help make happen in this country, which is, at my own firm, and I've made it clear, I want to identify women and help make sure that they become leaders in our organization and prove that they can be leaders in politics and government. Look, we have a chief of staff of the White House who's a woman. And so maybe some of my fatherly instincts hadn't caught up to reality or my aspirations or expectations for what I want to see our world look like. So that's the one example I have. None of my other children have exhibited any interest in politics. And if they do, I think from this point forward, I will say, go for it. I'm behind you 100%.
Okay, so if she changes her mind again and decides she wants to run for office, and she asks you to be her campaign manager, what's your response?
Well, first of all, if she says she wants to run for office, I'll support her 100%, and I will find her somebody better than me to be a campaign manager.
It's not a goal that you look forward to, is that it?
I look forward to my children doing exactly what they want.
Mm-hmm.
I really, as a father, do not have any desire to prescribe what my children's lives are like. I really want them, and I tell them this, life is an adventure. It's got to be your adventure. Go do it. I will help you. I'll support you. I'll give you whatever guidance I can give you, whatever resources I can be helpful with, but do not do something because I want you to do it. you've got to go live your life.
For the sake of our audience, which is generally speaking New Yorkers, we have a very bitter mayoral campaign going on in New York City, and New York has very high taxes. There's a wealth of good things about New York. There's some bad things about New York. And people once again are talking about, if so-and-so wins or so-and-so wins, I'm moving to Florida.
Right.
Now, I've been reading a lot about Florida, particularly Broward County, particularly Miami area, having been overbuilt. Too many residential, too many office. What is the realist for those of our fellow New Yorkers, or at least my fellow New Yorkers, who want to go down there? What's the prospect of getting an apartment or a condo or a home?
So certainly the prices have risen since pre-COVID in South Florida. I think net, Florida's probably still a more affordable place to live. The question of whether it's overbuilt really is always a question of policies and creativity. One would never say, don't develop in New York, it's overbuilt. You just say, go be creative. And that's what's been the magic of New York City, right? So I think, South Florida in particular, and other parts of Florida, Tampa's booming, Orlando's booming, Jacksonville's growing significantly, Southwest Florida, all of these places are seeing real growth. I think just like Manhattan, just like Brooklyn today doesn't look anything like it did when I was a kid. It's really a question of what can you build to accommodate for the demand for people to be here. So, there will be infrastructure strains in South Florida, but I think in the long term, it's going to be up to the creativity of the business community there, the developer community, and the people in government to figure out how do we accommodate for all this demand to be a part of the Florida experience. And I'm confident it can happen because I'm sitting here with this view in Manhattan with you, and so I know that when creative people want to make it happen, it gets done.
But I'm glad you did mention Brooklyn, because there's only two types of people in the world: those that live in Brooklyn and those that want to live in Brooklyn.
Right.
Jonathan, thank you very much for being with us today, and I wish you success in your business at Converge. As we close today's episode of Building Bridges, that which unites us, I'm struck by the power of strategic leadership and public service to drive real impact. Jonathan, thank you for the work you do to help others navigate complexity with integrity and purpose. And thank you for joining us. With every conversation, we have the opportunity to build bridges that unite us.
This is Building Bridges with Michael Hershman.